In parts of Europe, trust in power isn't just low, it's completely gone, with many leaders quietly stealing from their own people. These are the places where shady deals, political cover-ups, and abuse of power have become part of everyday life. In this video, we're breaking down the 10 most corrupt countries in Europe for 2025. We'll be using the Corruption Perceptions Index CPI, the perfect database that shows just how bad things really are. The CPI is like GPS for navigating where power and corruption collide. 0 is totally corrupt, the kind of place you should avoid, and 100 is squeaky clean. So, what do you think? Has corruption in Europe become worse? Before we begin, don't forget to like and subscribe, so you never miss out on important topics like this. 10. Albania. With a corruption score of 42 out of 100, this small Balkan nation has a big problem when it comes to transparency and fair play, having big problems with organized crime. Over the years, Albania has built up a reputation for shady business dealings, weak institutions, and politicians who tend to look out more for their own wallets than the public. Ask a local, and they'll probably tell you that knowing the right person often gets you further than knowing the rules. There's a long-running joke in the region that in Albania, you can get just about anything if you have the right envelope. The justice system is riddled with allegations of bribery, and public contracts often end up in the hands of the politically connected. Add in a police force that's not exactly known for following the book, and it's easy to see why many citizens feel stuck in a rigged system. Even though Albania has its eyes set on joining the EU, the road there is bumpy, mostly because the EU keeps pointing out the same old issues: lack of accountability, slow reforms, and corruption that won't go away. Still, people continue trying, families rely on help from abroad, and the cafe culture thrives. But under the surface, the corruption is hard to ignore. 9. Hungary. Hungary, with a corruption score of 41 out of 100, is a country that seems to walk the tightrope between modern Europe and something a bit more old school. While the streets of Budapest might impress tourists with their popular tourist spots, politics and business often mix in ways that aren't exactly clean. Public money seems to mysteriously end up in the pockets of people with close ties to the government. Critics say the current leadership has built a tight circle of loyalists who've gotten rich on state contracts and EU funds. And even though Hungary's part of the European Union, that hasn't stopped it from coming into problems with Brussels over concerns like press freedom and corruption. There's a saying in Hungary that the fish rots from the head, and many believe that those at the top are setting the tone for how the whole system operates. Investigative journalists have tried to shine a light on shady deals, but they're often met with lawsuits, intimidation, or sudden job loss. For everyday Hungarians, it can feel like the rules keep changing and not in their favor. And while there's still some pushback, especially from younger generations, it's hard to challenge a system that's become so good at protecting itself. 8. North Macedonia. With a score of 40 out of 100, North Macedonia is no stranger to corruption, and it's been an uphill battle trying to change that. The country has made headlines for a lot of things over the years: a long-standing name dispute with Greece, attempts to join the EU and NATO, and some major political scandals that almost sound made for TV. One of the most infamous moments? A wiretapping scandal that exposed thousands of recorded phone calls, revealing how deeply politics, police, and business were entangled. That event rocked the country and opened a lot of eyes to just how far corruption had spread. Since then, leaders have promised reforms, but progress has been slow and uneven. The government still faces accusations of handing out jobs and contracts to friends and allies, while regular folks often have to deal with red tape, favoritism, or flat-out bribery just to get basic services. There's also a common belief that people vote not for change, but for whoever offers the better deal. Voter buying and political pressure are not unheard of. Many locals argue that the money would have been better spent fixing roads or schools. In the end, North Macedonia is a country trying to turn the page, but the past keeps dragging its feet. 7. Serbia. Serbia, with a corruption score of 35 out of 100, is a country where political power often feels like a family business. Many Serbs say that if you want to get ahead, whether in work, education, or even traffic, you'd better have connections. And that mindset doesn't stop at street level. Big infrastructure projects, state contracts, even media ownership, it often ends up going to people with deep ties to political elites. There's also a widespread feeling that the ruling party has extended its influence into every corner of public life, from the courts to the cops. Opposition voices struggle to break through, and journalists investigating corruption sometimes end up harassed, threatened, or worse. Despite wanting to move closer to the EU, Serbia keeps hitting the same wall. Critics argue that it talks the talk but doesn't walk the walk when it comes to actual reform. Meanwhile, average citizens deal with a sluggish system where bribes or favors are often the only way to cut through red tape. It's not uncommon to hear stories of folks paying unofficial fees to speed up a license or court case. And while there's pride in Serbia's culture and history, there's also a deep frustration with how long corruption has been allowed to fester. 6. Ukraine. Ukraine, also with a score of 35 out of 100, has become a global focus in recent years, but corruption remains one of its oldest battles. For decades, the country has struggled with a system that favors the well-connected and punishes the honest. Even before the war brought the world's attention to Ukraine, its oligarchs had a tight grip on politics, media, and industry. These powerful figures often used their influence to shape laws, dodge taxes, and win government contracts. People joke that in Ukraine, money talks, and if you want something done, the official route is usually the slowest and most expensive. Courts have long been seen as unreliable, with judges accused of accepting bribes or bending the rules to help whoever has deeper pockets. But it's not just the elites. Regular citizens have often had to slip some cash to get basic services moving. Corruption has seeped into everything from hospitals to education to traffic stops. That said, the past decade has seen pushback. Many Ukrainians are deeply proud of their resilience and independence, but when it comes to cleaning up corruption, even the most optimistic voices admit it's going to take more than speeches and headlines to fix a system that's been broken for so long. 5. Turkey. With a corruption score of 34 out of 100, Turkey's troubles aren't just about politics. They're about how power has quietly tightened its grip over nearly every part of life. Over the last couple of decades, key public offices and institutions have become closely linked to one party's dominance. Big construction projects, government tenders, even airport deals. These often go to companies with friendly ties to the people in charge. And when things don't add up financially, the investigations tend to either vanish or quietly shift blame. The media landscape doesn't help. Most of the big news outlets are owned by business figures who are closely aligned with the government, so it's rare to see real accountability. Journalists who dig too deep into corruption stories risk losing their jobs. Courts and law enforcement, once seen as tools of balance, are now viewed by critics as extensions of power. People might not always say it out loud, but in many circles, there's a quiet understanding. If you want to succeed, don't ask too many questions. Despite all of this, everyday citizens continue to push for fairness, especially younger generations who are tired of feeling like the rules only apply to the powerless. 4. Bosnia and Herzegovina. With a corruption score of 33 out of 100, one of the main problems is how the government is split along ethnic lines, a structure created after the war to keep peace, but which now often fuels gridlock and backdoor deals. There are multiple presidents, layers of bureaucracy, and so many overlapping authorities that it's nearly impossible to tell who's responsible for what. That kind of setup has turned public service into a playground for political parties, where jobs, funding, and contracts are handed out based on loyalty, not need or merit. People often joke that in Bosnia, knowing someone is more useful than knowing something. And unfortunately, it's not just talk. Reports of bribery, favoritism, and misuse of funds are a regular part of life. Public tenders are notoriously not transparent, and local businesses can struggle to survive if they don't play by the unspoken rules. Even foreign investments can get stuck in red tape, unless palms are greased along the way. While some attempts at reform have been made under EU pressure, progress is painfully slow. For many Bosnians, it feels like the system is set up to stay broken because it works just fine for those at the top. 3. Belarus. A score of 33 out of 100 puts Belarus near the bottom of the list, and it's not hard to see why. Often called Europe's last dictatorship, Belarus runs on a kind of control that leaves very little room for questioning authority. The president has held power since the 1990s, and during that time, power has become more centralized, less transparent, and deeply resistant to outside scrutiny. Corruption in Belarus isn't just about money changing hands. It's about how the system itself is designed to protect those in charge. Public resources are often used to reward loyalty, and the few business people allowed to succeed usually have close ties to the state. If you step out of line, the consequences aren't just professional, they can be personal. Opposing voices, whether in politics, journalism, or even on social media, are quickly silenced. This tight grip on the country means there's very little space for anti-corruption efforts or independent investigations. Courts aren't independent, and police often act more like political enforcers than public servants. Many Belarusians have simply learned to keep their heads down. And yet, there's quiet resistance. Protests, brave reporting, and digital activism continue to rise, but in a place where the rules are written by the powerful, change doesn't come easy. 2. Azerbaijan. With a corruption score of just 22 out of 100, Azerbaijan sits at the bottom of the European pack, and it's not just because of a few bad apples. This oil-rich country has all the ingredients for wealth and success, but much of its fortune ends up in the hands of a small elite. The ruling family and its inner circle have held on to power for decades, and they've turned that control into serious wealth. Critics often describe the country as a family business dressed up as a democracy. Elections are held, but they rarely bring change, and opposition parties face heavy pressure. At the heart of the problem is how national resources are managed. Oil revenues flow into government hands, and from there, large sums quietly disappear into murky projects or shell companies. Independent journalists who try to trace the money often face arrests, intimidation, or exile. The legal system follows the same playbook. Officials rarely face consequences, and court rulings tend to fall in line with political interests. Even basic freedoms like speaking out or organizing a protest come with risks. The people of Azerbaijan are no strangers to this system, and many just focus on survival rather than change. For now, corruption isn't just part of the system in Azerbaijan, it's the system. 1. Russia. Topping the list with a score of 22 out of 100, Russia is more than just Europe's largest country. It's also one of its most corrupt. Under Vladimir Putin, a tight circle of allies and oligarchs have gained control over major industries, media, and political power. And in Russia, when power moves, money follows. The richest men in the country aren't just businessmen. They're often former politicians or people closely linked to the Kremlin. It's a system where being close to power is more profitable than innovation or hard work. And while average Russians deal with broken roads, underfunded hospitals, and rising prices, the wealth gap between everyday citizens and the elite keeps growing. But the corruption doesn't stop at money. The legal system is seen as a tool for control. Judges rarely go against the state, and whistleblowers or activists often find themselves in court, or worse. Even foreign companies that do business in Russia are forced to play by these unwritten rules. There's an old Russian saying, "The law is like a wagon. It goes where you pull it." In modern Russia, that wagon often gets pulled wherever the powerful need it to go, while some brave citizens and journalists still try to expose the truth. The system is built to crush resistance,